Williams.
And I'm Billy Thomas.
And welcome to another edition of From the Woods Today. We've got some really neat topics today and some that basically would touch everybody.
Yes, I'm really excited about today's show. Glad to have you all with us. We've got a couple of reoccurring guests that are back with us today. We're going to be talking about National Water Quality Month. So August has been designated as National Water Quality Month, and we're going to have our very own Lee Moser talking about kind of what is water quality and just start kind of exploring a little bit about what we can do to ensure, we have good, high quality water.
It's very important for everyone, not just woodland owners, but everyone.
Certainly. And, here in Kentucky with half the state covered in forests, they play a really important role in the quality of our water, right? So that's really important. We're really excited to have Lee talking about that and kind of celebrating that. And then we're going to have our forest health specialist, Dr. Ellen Crocker. Always a treat to have Dr. Crocker with us. And she's going to be talking about a what's bugging my tree segment. So we'll say that, let her kind of drop that on you all in a little bit. But we're glad to have you all with us. If you have questions for our presenters, you can use the chat function. If you're on YouTube or if you're listening via podcast, you can hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can respond that way. But glad to be with you, Renee, on this nice day here in Lexington, Kentucky.
Definitely. And Lee is ready to go. That's awesome. So, Lee, tell us a little bit about what your talk is about today.
Yeah. So, you all reached out to me a little while ago and let me know that it's National Water Quality Month here in August.
Whoops.
So I work with water quality regularly, so I kind of every day is water quality day. Every month's water quality month. But I wanted to share a little bit today about what water quality is, because it's not one of those things where you look at it and you see it, it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you can look and say, well, there's something going on with that water. But not always, because sometimes things are just dissolved in the water that you can't see that are poor water quality and potentially toxic or dangerous. So we're going to talk about what water quality actually is, how water quality parameters are defined, and then we're going to go into some of the things that we can do on the land or as homeowners to address our water quality impacts. So that's where we're going today.
Looking forward to it.
Well, we'll follow your lead, Lee.
Sounds good. Let me see if I can get this thing to share. I always struggle just a little bit with this out the gate. So
you're fine. Well, don't worry. They change it on us weekly anyway.
They do.
It seems like it.
Weeks ago, we were like, where is everything? So yeah, don't worry about that whatsoever.
I'm almost there.
So we will remind you that if you have any questions for Lee during his presentation, just put them in the chat pod and we will get them answered after.
Yeah, so I think I'm probably coming through here. I'm going to pop out of the presentation a couple times to show off some different websites and tools that I like to use when I'm exploring water quality, specifically here in Kentucky. So if you're elsewhere, you may have similar things in your state to look for. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into it. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm Lee Moser. I'm an Agriculture Extension Associate for Water Quality in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. And I guess I titled the talk Soil and Water Conservation to Support Water Quality, but we're also really going to get at the heart of what water quality is, how we define water quality, and then we're just going to start talking about some of the best management practices that we use here in Kentucky for land managers to address water quality potential impacts on their property. So here we go. Hopefully I can advance my slide. There we go. So as I mentioned, it's National Water Quality Month. So I'll give you a short overview of what that actually is, because August is National Water Quality Month. We'll go through the water quality overview, talk a little bit about water quality in Kentucky and how you can learn more information about streams and waterways and their water quality near you in the state. And then we'll learn some things about the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act and how that helps support soil and water conservation in the state. And then I'll have maybe a thought-provoking kind of final slide to maybe spur some discussion, maybe just think on the future of water quality. So National Water Quality Month, is dedicated to making the most of the relatively small amount of fresh water that we have, because having clean water is vital to our individual health, collective agricultural needs, and the needs of the environment. So that's directly from National Water Quality Month organization's website. What they share on there is a plethora of great information. National Water Quality Month was founded in 2005 by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and it celebrates just not only water quality, but the landmark environmental legislation of the 1970s, which are the Clean Water Act of 1972 and the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. So I'm gonna, as I mentioned, bounce in and out of this presentation a little bit. I hope I'm showing it and coming through. So I would implore you to check out the National Water Quality Month website. Billy is going to share a link here shortly. It's got some videos and more detailed information. And it really gives you the background not only on the holiday or the celebration of the month of National Water Quality Month, but some of the different ways that we impact water quality on the landscape and some of the ways we can protect water quality on the landscape. So I won't give you all any more scrolling nausea. Let me see if I can start sharing my screen again right from where I'm at. I was practicing this earlier. There we go. So here's the why. So we alluded to it a little bit previously, but the why is why do we care? Because 70% of the Earth's surface is water, only 3% is fresh water, and of that, only 1% is readily accessible surface or groundwater. So that means we don't really have access to a lot compared to of fresh water compared to the amount that's on the earth of water in general. So it's important to protect this resource. It's a scarce resource if you look at it that way. And when we're thinking about growing populations, some of the things that we're facing with climate change and all the challenges associated with that, the impacts to the water cycle, it really becomes even more important going into the future that we do the best we can to protect water quality and water quantity associated with our properties and our cities and around the world. So the thing about water quality is protecting water quality is quite a challenge because you may remember from science class back whenever that water is known as universal solvent. And the challenge with water is that it likes to dissolve and pick up just about anything that's soluble and carry it off dissolved in it. You may not be able to look at the water and tell it's even there. And the other thing that it likes to do is it has a lot of energy, so it can suspend particles as it's rolling downhill with gravity and transport potential contaminants. Maybe it's floating some litter down the stream or down the hill and into the stream. So those are all things that we have to consider when we're managing land and the potential to impact water quality. So whenever we're working out in our forest, working on the farm, working in our yards in the city, thinking about how our actions are impacting water quality and potentially causing things to either dissolve in water that's going into waterways or suspending sediment in the water or potentially running trash off into the water. Those are all important considerations. And we're going to talk about best management practices a little bit later on in the presentation, specifically associated with the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act and the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan, since they're relevant to landowners. But you can also consider best management practices around your home if you're in an urban area as well, things that prevent runoff. A lot of stormwater best management practices that may be of interest to homeowners. So maybe in the future we could touch on that. So the one thing that I kind of want to leave you with is this catchy phrase that I hear Dr. Amanda Gumbert say an awful lot. If it's on the ground, it's in the water. And this is one of the ways I kind of like to start the conversation when I'm talking about runoff and non-point source pollution, which is pollution that comes from diverse, diffuse sources, is that it's really all of us when we're talking about runoff and pollution. It's the way that we modify the land. It's the way that our cars potentially leak oil on a parking lot, fertilizer runoff, all part of just the way we live our lives and the system that we're a part of. So being wise stewards and observant of things that are on the ground, what we're putting on the ground, and knowing that it can interact with water and find its way to our waterways is an important concept. So all that being said, we probably need to define what water quality is. And United States Geologic Survey offers water quality can be thought of as a measure of the suitability of water for a particular use based on selected physical, chemical, and biological characteristics. So when we think of physical characteristics, we might think of the temperature. When we think of chemical properties. We might think of some of the metals that could be dissolved in it or the pH. When we think about biological characteristics, we might think of the different macroinvertebrates that are living in the stream that are indicators of health. So it's kind of this holistic view of what water quality is based on multiple indicators. And to assess and manage water quality, we utilize water quality standards that are developed by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, with the caveat that if your state has an agency like we do here in Kentucky, the Kentucky Division of Water, we have the opportunity to establish our own standards. And there's a little bit of a process to do that that we'll kind of talk about here shortly. So water quality standards are made up of 3 different components: the designated use, the criteria to protect designated use, and the anti-degradation requirements to protect existing uses and high quality or high value waters. We'll go through each of these in brief here in the next several slides. So you've probably heard of designated uses before. And these are the guidelines that EPA typically provides for their nationalized system of pollution discharge emission system. And protection and propagation of fish, shellfish, and wildlife, recreation, public drinking water supply, and agricultural, industrial, navigational, and other purposes are their designated uses that they would recommend. So here in Kentucky, we've followed in similar suit. We break down our habitat into warm water aquatic habitat, which is the majority of what we have in the state; cold water aquatic habitat, which is what you might think of as, well, streams that might support organisms like trout that require colder water for their life cycle; primary contact recreation, which would be things like swimming; secondary contact recreation would be things like wading, fishing; domestic water supply; and then outstanding state resource water is another designated use that we see for some of our highest quality, um, really, really nice waterways in the state. And I'll show you here shortly how you can kind of figure out what all those ratings are for various waterways around your home here in Kentucky. So the criteria to protect designated use has to be based on scientific rationale, which is great, right? And the Clean Water Act, specifically in Section 304A, reflects the latest scientific knowledge that we have related to water quality criteria. So those specific criteria related to, say, how much iron is safe to be in the water before it becomes toxic. The other important piece of the puzzle is the actual list of toxic pollutants, which is the 307A section list of the Clean Water Act. And that's growing. So there are emerging and new contaminants that are getting added to that list, things that we don't necessarily know. A good example might be from recent times is something like PFAS that people are probably hearing a lot about. So when we're establishing water quality criteria, we have to make sure that we're actually covering the gambit of things that might be in the water and of need to monitor and figure out if there are any toxic impacts, and to make sure that those are in support of the designated use at the levels that they're occurring in our waterways. And if a waterway has multiple designated uses, we have to make sure that the water quality based on the water quality criteria supports the most sensitive designated use. So if that was, say, drinking water and secondary contact recreation, drinking water is going to have a more sensitive designated use water quality criteria than, say, secondary contact recreation in many cases. So our water quality criteria are presented in 2 different types of formats. And there's a kind of a flow chart for how states can adopt these criteria. Specifically for the numeric criteria, a lot of states end up just adopting the 304A criteria that I mentioned previously. There's also an option to modify the 304A recommendations of how much of a various pollutant is safe in a waterway based on site-specific conditions in the state. For instance, we have extremely hard water in Kentucky, so that might potentially impact the water quality criteria for various pollutants. And then other scientifically defensible methods that are based on peer-reviewed literature or other methods that are available through EPA can be utilized to establish criteria in a state. And the numeric criteria is essentially something to the nature of 1.0 milligrams per liter of a various constituent is considered impaired, as an example. And that's very arbitrary and made up right as I'm speaking. But that would be an example of a numeric criteria for water quality. So this is a more broader approach to water quality criteria, and this is the narrative criteria. Narrative criteria, like what I'm showing on the screen here, and I'll read it here shortly, can serve as the basis for establishing water quality-based effluent limits on wastewater and stormwater discharges where a numeric criteria has not yet been established for a specific pollutant. So, for instance, if some sort of issue is observed that goes against this statement here, which is all water shall be free from substances attributable to wastewater discharges or other pollutant sources that do one or more of the following. Number one, settle or form objectionable deposits, float as debris, scum, oil, or other matter-forming nuisances, produce objectionable color, odor, taste, or turbidity, cause injury to, are toxic to, or produce adverse physiological responses in human, animals, or plants, or produce undesirable or nuisance aquatic life. Those could be subject, if it's something that's not already on that 304A list or the 307A list under the Clean Water Act section, that could end up having a effluent limit established on it in the state or territory where the water happens to be having an issue that's observed that goes against these statements. So this is kind of a more broad brush approach that allows new pollutants or things that are observed to get called out and come into regulation. And then the third component is basically the anti-degradation requirement to protect existing uses and high quality, such as high value waters. So one of the designated uses that I mentioned was an outstanding state resource water, and this would be one of those anti-degradation categories and statuses. This is a lovely picture of the Big South Fork at sunset down in South Central Kentucky. And basically, things like an outstanding state resource water designation are a framework for maintaining and protecting water quality that's already good, or water quality that's been improved to a point where there are no longer issues or water quality impairments. And it's designed to ensure that there's full future support of the designated use for that waterway, whether it's designated as warm water aquatic habitat, drinking water supply, or outstanding state resource water. And the general idea is that it protects the watershed as a whole as a means to protect the water body itself. And it does that through ensuring that robust buffer is adjacent to the waterway and that thoughtful process is taken when any sort of development is proposed in areas of this high quality status. So I often get questions about water quality in Kentucky. How's the water quality in Kentucky? And the answer is it depends on where you're at. It depends on the time of the year sometimes. It depends on if it's rained. But to get a general idea of the assessments that have happened, our friends over at the Kentucky Division of Water, who we do a lot of work with through their non-point source pollution Section 319 program, have developed the Kentucky Water Maps portal. And the Kentucky Division of Water, along with other agencies and organizations throughout the state, are actively engaged in water quality management. But primarily, if you have questions related to water quality, they would be the ones that you would reach out to, or feel free to reach out to us through Extension. But I want to highlight this Water Maps portal because it's got a lot of really excellent resources. And I'm going to do the shift out of screen share thing one more time and see if I can get it to show. Am I showing the browsers over there? Can Billy
Yes.
confirm? Awesome.
Yes.
So this, as I mentioned, is one of my favorite interactive web portals to get lots of great data. So if you're interested in the flood hazard potential of your property, you can access Kentucky flood hazard maps. The water health portal is a good one. So I mentioned things like designated uses. So one of the things that the state has to do to manage and protect water quality is go out and assess streams on an annual basis. And they don't get them all every year. It's a rotating thing. But the results of those assessments show up here on this water portal. So if you have a waterway near you, you can likely find it on this interactive map and learn a little bit more about the water quality near you in the latest monitoring results. And other than that, there's lots of other interesting things on here. If you're concerned about groundwater, there's well information, information about special use waters for forestry purposes, all sorts of things to explore. So Billy will be sharing that link as well. I won't spend too much more time on this. We could probably spend an entire session on just the water portal itself because it's really cool and lots of information to find out there. So I'm going to hopefully seamlessly transition right back into the presentation again. I think I succeeded.
Yes.
Excellent. So now we get to the part where we start talking about soil and water conservation. So to make that transition, I really like to use this slide because it talks about how the different components of the water cycle changes, land use changes. So as we're managing our land, if we're putting roads in, whether those are for recreational purposes or say we're planning a harvest on our forest, or if we're clearing fields for agriculture, if we're starting to clear an area for development for um, a suburban area for a neighborhood, or if a city's starting to urbanize. This gives a general rundown of what happens to the water cycle. So forests and natural ground cover, as you see in the upper left-hand corner, do a really good job of reducing runoff and promoting infiltration and evapotranspiration. And as land use changes in the watershed, the proportion of water in runoff tends to increase, while the amount infiltrating into the ground and leaving as evapotranspiration decreases. So this has great water quality implications and water quantity if we think back to what we've just discussed. Specifically, the quote, if it's on the ground, it's in the water. So more runoff in my mind means more opportunities for soil erosion and potential water quality degradation by picking up and dissolving or transporting either soluble materials that are deposited on the ground that may be toxic, or transporting, say, litter that's on the side of the road. So as we manage land for forestry, agriculture, or development for homes and increase impervious surfaces, it's critical to implement best management practices to protect water quality, which I know many of our listeners and landowners around the state are already doing. So the main way in forestry and agriculture that we do that is through the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act and the Ag Water Quality Plan. This was passed in the Ag Water Quality Act was passed in 1994, and it's basically designed to protect surface and groundwater sources from pollution from agriculture and silvicultural activities. So soil erosion, any materials that may be on the ground that could dissolve into the water or wash off. And the act specifically affects landowners with 10 or more contiguous acres who are actively engaged in agriculture or silviculture. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a tool to help you choose best management practices, but it's also kind of designed to help you assess your operation and your property and identify where they might be most effective and help with that soil and water protection. So this will be another opportunity for me to mess up the presentation potentially by popping out, but I want to highlight that Kentucky, specifically our partners at Kentucky Division of Water, have worked to develop a very easy tool to utilize to develop an ag water quality plan and help you to think through this process for your property. It contains a lot of the resource information that the university has helped to co-develop or develop related to these best management practices in various links so that you can kind of learn more about the various best management practices as you go through and complete your ag water quality plan. So just to give you an idea, if you're to travel to the link that I was showing on that slide or the one below that shows all the different resources that Billy will put in the chat, this is the landing page that you're going to hit on the Kentucky Division of Water's website that will give you access to click the link to the online planning tool. If you still like to use a PDF form, I think there's one available for the paper plan. And then one of the really cool and interesting resources, I think, is the BMP resources page. This is where I've spent a lot of my time working over the past several years, is better understanding a lot of these different best management practices and how they can be applied across the landscape in various settings. So specifically, since this is a forest or silviculture based audience, mostly I'm guessing, but also probably folks from other industries, and most operations and landowners have a lot of diverse things going on. We'll be specifically talking about the silviculture BMPs today, and we'll only have time for one of them. But other areas of the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act are also covered on here, and lots of different best management practices to choose from. And they range from things related to crops, things related to livestock, streams and other water bodies, pesticides and fertilizers, and things that are going on around the farmstead. So you might find information here related to septic system management. You might find information here related to implementing rotational grazing systems, proper pesticide and fertilizer storage and handling procedures to protect water quality, and things like riparian buffers to protect water quality and um, hopefully keep some erosion from occurring on our stream banks. So I'm going to try one more time to transition seamlessly back into the presentation. And it looks like I've succeeded again. So I'm on a roll today. So again, the 6 sections of the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act: silviculture, pesticides and fertilizers, farmstead, crops, livestock, and then the streams and other water bodies. A lot of property owners may have a little bit of everything, but I implore you to check it out for yourself through those links that we shared. So as I mentioned, we're going to highlight a little bit about silviculture today. So the primary resources for the silviculture best management practices when you're thinking about soil and water conservation for forest landowners are FOR 67, which is Kentucky Forest Practice Guidelines for Water Quality Management, and FOR 130, the Kentucky Logging Best Management Practice Guide. Both were produced here in the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources at the University of Kentucky Martin Gatton College of Agriculture, Food and Environment. And those efforts were led up by our department chair, Dr. Jeff Stringer. So those are great resources to check out as you're thinking about how you'd like to develop an ag water quality plan or plan for harvest or roads or things like that on your property. So if you look at the rundown of the 10 best management practices for silviculture under the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act, you have access roads, trails, and landings, revegetation of silviculturally disturbed areas, streamside management zone, sinkholes, sinking streams and caves, fluids and trash, proper planting of tree seedlings by machine, fertilization, application of pesticides, site preparation for reforestation, and silviculture in wetland areas. And all of these have lots of great guidance on how to protect from soil erosion and ultimately protect water quality. So today we're going to have time to cover one, which is number 1 in the BMP guide: access roads, trails, and landings. And we're really just going to skim the surface of it. There's a lot in those 2 publications that we can't cover in the time we've got today. So I implore you to check those resources out. So generally, the best management practice number 1 of access roads, trails, and landings provides guidance and guidelines for how to construct and maintain roads, skid trails, and landings on your property, and hopefully make them in a way that you can maintain them and use them for the long run for multiple purposes if you're interested in recreation on your property after any kind of harvest operations. So one of the major considerations, and we were just down for Woodland Owner Short Course, and I should probably throw a plug in for that because there's one coming up this weekend at Roundstone Seed, and I'm sure Billy and Renee will talk about that later. But we were just down on the 13th at Robinson Forest looking at some of the roads and trails, and you want to talk about some steep roads, some of the grades up there. Wow. So considering grade and spacing of drainage control structures like broad-based dips and culverts is really important as your grade goes up on these sites. So in general, with grade on roads, it's recommended not to exceed 15% grade. Otherwise, you begin to increase significantly your risk of slippage and rutting, which can damage your roads and lead to increased maintenance. And it is recommended or advised that it can be acceptable to exceed 15% up to 18% for stretches of less than 200 feet if necessary. So one of the key takeaways for this slide and grade management in general is that as the grade increases on your road, the frequency of water drainage control structures and the spacing of them is going to need to increase. So this is table 1.1 from 470. And just for example, as you go from a 2 to 5% grade, you could space your water control structures like a culvert or a broad-based dip at 300 to 500 feet and likely not experience um, water running down the middle of your road under normal circumstances. And if you had it appropriately sent to the ditch, it would likely hold up. But when we go to something like 11 to 15%, we're looking at spacing that's less than half of that in some cases, so down to like 100 to 200 feet. So definitely have to consider grade when you're talking about your water control and drainage control structures. So speaking of which, we need to talk about those a little bit. So I've mentioned broad-based dip a couple times already, and this is kind of an example of what something of that nature looks like. And it's just another tool to basically help divert water downslope. And it can often work well in conjunction with a ditch on the uphill side. So a strategy might be insloping your steep high-grade road to a ditch and then draining to some sort of a drainage structure at various intervals based on the grade, such as a culvert, as shown in this figure, or a broad-based dip. And one of the things that really important to consider, and I've definitely seen a lot of this at the outlets of culverts, is protecting the outlets of those culverts for the energy that's coming out of those with the water. A lot of erosion can occur in these areas downslope. So being sure that you're establishing enough rock downslope of your culvert outlets is really important. Also ensuring that either natural vegetation or rock in your channels is present, because those are going to be areas of concentrated flow where water will erode if not properly prevented. So other areas where drainage will be interesting and potentially cause problems are low spots in roads and seeps. Folks have probably had this experience if they've cut roads in Kentucky or seen roads cut in Kentucky after they're done. We often run into shallow groundwater that seeps out. So those are going to be areas where additional water control or drainage control structures might be needed. So I've talked about, the insloping method to a ditch and then hitting a culvert or a broad-based dip. But if you're in a lower gradient area with stable soils, you could also use an approach of crowning the road or outsloping. In that sort of low grade, stable soil area, those are more appropriate. But in a high grade area, going with an insloping road is always nice. That way, if you do slip, you're going to the ditch instead of down the hill. So the other thing to note is that in many of the areas where roads get put in, ephemeral stream channels that don't flow all the time are present. So ensuring that those are not blocked is important. And either tying them into a ditch or a broad-based dip can help with relieving the flow from precipitation. And anytime you have a permanent stream, you're going to want to start thinking about things like floodplain permits and culverts to handle the water. Trying to advance this. Here we go. So stream crossings are another important aspect of access roads, trails, and landings. Ideally, we should keep roads as far as practical away from streams. But as we know, sometimes topography dictates that we get a little closer than maybe we'd like. So we do the best we can to protect our waterways. But this is a situation where if there is a crossing, we need to reach out to our contacts at the Kentucky Division of Water to determine if a floodplain permit or other kind of permit's necessary. General guidance is to cross at right angles. It helps to reduce the erosive potential of crossings. And then things like temporary bridges or culverts are preferable when crossings are unavoidable. I've covered up one of the little statements here that I had. Let me see. I can't go over it, but basically saying that low water crossing and fords are also an opportunity in certain areas. So this table 8.1 is also from FOR 70, the Logging Best Management Practice Guide, to kind of help with the decision support on what types of crossings are appropriate for different types of streams. So something that you may want to check out if you're building roads or crossings on your property. So outside of the best management practices of the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act, I kind of wanted to brainstorm some ideas of what are the other ways to protect water quality that landowners can get engaged in. And, you know, came up with get informed. You're already doing that today, but, there's tons of information on the Kentucky Division of Waters website related to floodplain permits, the best management practices. Other ways would be to reach out to Extension. EPA has a Water Quality Standards Academy if you're interested in some of the things that were mentioned early in the presentation. And then there's opportunities to figure out what your water quality standards are in your state through the link here down on the bottom through EPA's website if you're not in Kentucky. So great ways to inform yourself about water quality if you're interested. Other ways, participate in public events. This is just one example that I highlight often because we participated in it here in Lexington. But other places around the state have started to participate in Water Week events. And I know there's many other festivals and opportunities for folks to interact with water professionals around the state. So if there's events near you, we'd love to hear about them. Feel free to share them out to us. And provide feedback. So this is your opportunity to be heard when decisions are being made at public meetings or through focus groups or surveys. I know we all probably have survey fatigue from getting a million of these things, but it's a good way to make sure that when there's an opportunity to provide feedback related to water quality issues, your voice is heard. Just to highlight an effort that we're working on right now out in Woodford County, we're in the process of developing a watershed plan through the Kentucky Water Research Institute. And we are currently conducting focus groups to better understand what landowners find as acceptable best management practices to basically include in the best management practice implementation portion of the watershed plan. So their direct input is received and helps shape the guidelines that are put forth on how to protect water quality in the watershed. Another way, if you're interested in citizen science, is to get involved with things like Kentucky Watershed Watch. Got Melissa McAllister over at Kentucky Water Research Institute, be a good person to contact. But if you're interested in going out and learning how to monitor water, take water quality samples, and be a part of the efforts to characterize water quality around the state, Watershed Watch in Kentucky is a great opportunity. So check that out. And here's a plug for one of the programs that Dr. Amanda Gumbert's participating in, but also to encourage you to interact with both producer groups and other organizations around the state that deal with conservation. I said conversation almost there because what we're advocating for is to have a conversation about conservation, or as we like to call them, conservation conversations. Sorry about that. I always laugh on that one. So anyways, Dr. Amanda Gumbert is actually hosting a shop talk through One Good Ideas, Good Idea Forum platform tomorrow, talking to your neighbors about conservation. And then the following week, she'll have Ben Robin from Bourbon County talking about extending the grazing season with Kentucky producers. So I know groups like Kentucky Woodlands Owners Association have conversations and talk about conservation at their annual meeting this year and heard lots of talk about it. So that might be a good group for you to connect with if you're interested in talking about conservation. So this is where I'll leave the talk today. And I kind of threw on the agenda that I wanted to talk about the future of water quality. And it's really up to what we do on the land, but there's some other variables in play, thinking a lot about climate and basically came up with this to share as the closing. With the current climatological trends of warmer and wetter in Kentucky, I just attended the Climate Services Summit, and that was a trend that was highlighted by several of the climatologists there, warmer and wetter in different parts of the year. What are the implications of that for water quality? And then the increased frequency of high intensity precipitation and severe weather events. If you think about that, those kind of intersect with water quality and land management in some interesting ways. And maybe that's a conversation that folks might be open to. If not, we can leave it at that as something to think about and maybe address another day. So in closing, if you have any thoughts, feel free to reach out. But I also want to plug the work of one of my teammates, Catherine Bullock, who has put together a really nice new soil and water resources webpage through the Department of Forestry and Natural Resources for us to share information to you all, the public. So check it out, soilandwater.ca.uky.edu, or help yourself to the QR code on this image. So with that, I will wrap and open the floor for discussion and conversations. And hopefully I didn't run too long.
Wonderful presentation. Thank you. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
indeed.
Yes,
Appreciate that.
definitely.
Lee, as you were going over it, we're so excited. We're like, oh, we're going to have to do a whole series on these BMPs, right? I think what you covered is really cool, but there's just so much depth here. There really is.
There's a lot of depth in the BMPs, and he just barely touched on one, and there's a whole lot more to that.
Yeah, I went down the road of putting 3 in there, and I was like, oh, I'm going to go like an hour and a half.
No, it's really good stuff, and it's stuff that's really important for landowners and those that work with them to kind of be aware of this and know what needs to be done. So, really appreciate the work you're doing here, Lee. You and Dr. Gumbert, you've been such a great addition to the Forestry Natural Resource Extension team. We're just so excited you all are with us.
We're excited to be here.
It's awesome.
Thank
good
you.
Stuff. Really good stuff. So, folks, if you have questions for Lee, please use the chat function. And again, if you're a podcast listener or YouTube viewer, you can hit us up via email at forestry.extension@uky.edu, and we can get your response. Maybe slightly delayed, but maybe we'll get you a response.
But we'll get you a response, definitely.
All right. Well, again, Lee, appreciate you very much, buddy. Look forward to having you on again.
Yep, we'll definitely have that.
Thanks, y'all. I'm going to turn my video off and enjoy Dr. Crocker's segment here shortly.
Yeah, speaking of Dr.
Crocker, there you go.
She's in the house. Yes.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Great. You got some things bugging trees, huh?
So what's bugging your
tree today?
Always something. There's always something that, whether it's an insect or a pathogen, that's causing damage to our trees. And today we're going to talk about one that has been in the state for a few years, but a new invasive arrival to us called laurel wilt disease.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Well, we're looking forward to learning more.
Yeah, normally I say looking forward to it.
But we need to learn more. Right? We need to be educated, right? And Dr. Crocker is
that I can say I'm looking forward to.
All right. We'll leave you alone.
All right. Well, and that's the goal for today, in the pesky or what's bugging my tree segment. It tends to be a mix of different things causing problems on trees, from things that maybe look bad but aren't actually a threat to the health of trees, to things like what we're talking about today that can kill trees. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about laurel wilt disease, what it is, what it's doing in our woods and to our trees, and what you can be doing about it. So what is laurel wilt disease? It is a new invasive disease. And here you can kind of see those symptoms that it's causing. Wilt, like the name implies, wilty leaves, killing trees, and it's killing sassafras and spicebush. This is something that's native to Asia, but upon its arrival here, it is killing our sassafras trees. So laurel wilt describes the disease itself, but that disease is caused by an invasive fungus. Here's a picture of a tree with the bark kind of stripped away, and you can see this dark black streaky staining under the bark. That is the fungus that's actually killing the tree, as well as the tree's response to that. Here's another photo you can kind of see in this cross section, this ring of dark black streaky staining under the bark. That's that fungus that's killing the tree. You can also see something else in this picture though, this little line right here. And if we zoom in on that, you can see this tiny little beetle that's burrowing into that tree. And so not only is there an invasive fungus that's causing this disease, but there's an invasive beetle, the red bay ambrosia beetle, that is spreading this fungus from tree to tree. So you've got an invasive fungus being carried by an invasive beetle that is causing the death of our sassafras. So what does laurel wilt look like? You know, you're not going to see these tiny little beetles, but you might see things like death of sassafras trees. You might see sassafras trees that are looking really thin, have dropped all their leaves. This time of year, right about now, you might see early fall color. Now, we love the fall color of sassafras. It's really beautiful, reds and oranges. But if you're seeing that right now, that's a literal red flag in your tree. That's a sign of a problem. It is too early for fall color. And that's one of the common symptoms of laurel wilt disease. Really anything that's water stress, because what that fungus is doing is it's living inside the tree, strangling it from the inside out. And it looks like the tree is super water stressed because of that. So you might see the wilt, the droopy leaves. You might see this early fall color. You might see it dropping its leaves. All of those are going to be symptoms of that disease. Other things that you might look for would be the staining under the bark of the tree. Now, as you can imagine, this is kind of a destructive sampling practice. If you're cutting away all the bark on the side of this tree, it's not going to be great for the health of that tree. But if your tree is already really declining or dead, freshly killed by this laurel wilt disease, and you were to cut away the bark, you would see this streaky black staining. And you can see that again in this branch that was cut just under the bark. That's the fungus as well as the tree trying to defend itself. Now, those are symptoms in sassafras, which is the tree species that is most being killed by laurel wilt. The name laurel wilt comes from the fact that sassafras is in the laurel family, and this disease impacts everything in the laurel family. Now, the good news for us is that for Kentucky, that is just going to be sassafras and spicebush. If we were in a different part of the country, other species might be at risk. And just a note that things like mountain laurel, despite the name, are not actually true laurels. They're in a different group and aren't going to be impacted by this, but sassafras certainly is. And the other species being spicebush. So with spicebush, the symptoms are really similar. It's just that spicebush looks slightly different. So you're going to see slightly different fall color in it. Here it is with this golden yellow color, way before it should be turning colors for the year. You can see these wilty, droopy leaves. Here you can see the leaves have actually shriveled up right on the plant. And with both of them, in addition to looking at those leaves in the canopy, other things you could look for would be new shoots. See the epicormic growth there. It's not only is it have a lot of it, but it's also dying back. And these tiny little insect holes. Those are the holes made by those tiny little red bay ambrosia beetles that are moving it from tree to tree. And here you can see a big spice bush. This is about as big as spice bush will get. Usually it's going to be an understory shrub, whereas sassafras might be more of a dominant tree. And you can see a couple things on it. Now, those holes are really tiny, so you might miss those, but you can see these kind of weird growths on it, right? They look like toothpicks sticking out of the plant. And what those are is the boring dust from the beetles themselves. So they're tunneling around in the tree, they're pushing out all the sawdust that they're creating, and they might look like long toothpicks or tiny holes. Again, these are going to be signs of that insect that's moving the fungus around. So that's what it might look like. And a little bit more information on laurel wilt and where it is. So here's a map of where laurel wilt disease has been found in the United States. And it's, again, thought to be native to Asia. And there, it's a native issue. It's not causing major death of trees. Here our trees aren't used to it, and it's causing really rapid and widespread death of trees. So it started out in this coastal area on a tree species we don't have called red bay laurel. It's a smaller tree and has really killed many, many red bay laurel. But then you'll notice that more recently we had a big jump into our area. And in this region of the country, that's going to be different tree species, a really different environment, but it's still causing tree death. Now you can imagine those little tiny beetles did not fly all the way over here, probably was accidentally introduced, someone moving around some wood. They didn't realize it was infested with those tiny little beetles. I mean, they're so small, you could easily miss them and accidentally bring it here. While we don't really know how that happened, we do know that it's present throughout a lot of Western Kentucky right now, all the way up into the Louisville area, the border with Tennessee. And we're going to have some new counties added this year to this map. I know that for sure. I've had a lot of new reports of laurel wilt disease in additional areas, both in southwestern Kentucky, but in also other parts of the state. So what does laurel wilt mean for us? In our region, it's going to be killing sassafras and spicebush. And I put a little star next to spicebush there because while I've seen spicebush being killed in areas where you have big, tall sassafras trees over top, I haven't seen spicebush being killed if you don't have that. So those little beetles, they really like the bigger diameter trees. The bigger trees they go to first. Then they'll move into the smaller trees, and then they can move into the spicebush. But if you don't have those big sassafras trees, it's possible your spicebush are going to be okay. They just won't be attractive enough to those beetles to build the populations in such a way that could cause them to be attacked really vigorously in the future. Now, if we think about laurel wilt disease as a whole and what it means broader outside of Kentucky, in other areas further south to us, there are a lot of other species in that laurel family. In Florida, it's already causing big problems for red bay laurel, but also for avocado. The avocado industry has been hit pretty hard by this. It's in the laurel family as well. So if you like eating avocado, you care about laurel wilt disease. So what can we do about laurel wilt disease? On the one hand, it's an invasive issue. It's an invasive insect spread by invasive fungus spread by an invasive insect, and the cat's out of the bag. It's here in the environment. So while we can't send it all back to its home, we can slow its spread. So if you think about that big jump that happened to our region, probably was through moving wood, maybe firewood. Someone thought they'd bring some firewood up here for a camping trip or something like that. I don't know, I'm just making things up, but you can avoid the spread of laurel wilt disease or other issues, insects and diseases in the future by burning firewood or buying firewood where you intend to burn it. If you're going to a new area, make sure you're not bringing something, a stowaway with you. That will cause way more problems than we can realize because some of these insects are super tiny. Also, because sassafras is grown for ornamental reasons, as maybe a landscape plant, as well as used in woodworking, make sure that if that's a hobby of yours or something you're interested in, you're not accidentally moving around laurel wilt disease with you. Another thing that we can do is to recognize symptoms of laurel wilt disease and report them early. I mentioned I'm getting a lot more reports of laurel wilt disease this year from new counties, and it's great to know more about where it is. We're still learning, I think, in the case of laurel wilt disease, where is it and what is it doing? So right now, this time of year, be on the lookout for dead trees. You can see maybe some brown leaves still stuck to the tree on the side of the road, as well as that early red fall color. If you're seeing that now, it's too early for fall color. Something is probably wrong with that tree. And if you do see some suspicious symptoms on a tree that's really declining, I did want to show you just really quickly, how do you collect those samples? And I've got a couple video clips from Alexandra Blevins, who is Forest Health at Kentucky Division of Forestry. She and I went out and recorded some videos to show you what the sampling process might look like. So here she is. She's just using her knife in this case, cutting away some of that bark of the sassafras tree. And oh yeah, you can see that streaky black staining under the bark. That is a telltale sign of laurel wilt disease. While you might see streaky black staining from some other things, that looks just like laurel wilt to me. So next she's going to collect a kind of wood chip sample, pretty thin, but it gets that streaky black tissue as well as some healthy tissue. That margin between those two is the best place to be looking for that fungus that causes laurel wilt disease. So she's trying to collect a tissue sample that can be sent to the University of Kentucky Plant Diagnostic Lab, and they can confirm whether or not that's laurel wilt disease. So you can see she's using her hatchet there and getting a pretty thin sample. And she's putting it in a plastic bag. And I think important for this, if you want to be submitting a sample, you've got to keep it refrigerated, not frozen, but keep it cool. And that way the fungus that's in there won't die. And that when you take it to the lab, they'll be able to tell you, is that laurel wilt disease or not? And then one other thing I want to throw in there, if you are out there collecting samples, make sure you clean off your equipment afterwards. Here you can see her pouring some alcohol on her hatchet and wiping it off. We don't want to accidentally be spreading laurel wilt disease in that process. And I'd say the same would go for if you're doing some pruning or something like that. You could accidentally be moving that fungus from sassafras to sassafras tree, not something you want to do. So another thing that you could consider if you've got really high value sassafras trees in an area where laurel wilt has been confirmed, there are some potential fungicide treatments out there. These are preventative treatments that should be done probably annually to protect high value landscape trees. Here you can see that injection process, injecting those trees with some different fungicides that are available commercially and on label right now. Propofol, you can do that now, but it has to be done regularly and is only an option if the tree is still pretty healthy. It needs to be able to move that fungicide around the tree to prevent infection. And always, if you are using a pesticide, make sure you read and follow that label. We are testing some different fungicides. That work is ongoing right now to see if there are other options available for laurel wilt disease. But the sad truth is probably in the near future, we're going to lose a lot of our sassafras. Now, that's really sad because not only do we have some of the biggest sassafras trees in the world right here in Kentucky, but these are wonderful trees for wildlife, for us. And we're on the lookout for trees with resistance to laurel wilt disease. So if you're in an area and you see laurel wilt disease come through, but you still have trees, maybe a tree that's still healthy when everything else has died, we really want to know about that. You can report those trees through the Tree Snap Citizen Science app. Let us know about it as well. We are trying to start a breeding program to find those special trees and then bring them back, put them back out on the landscape. We're really hopeful that there will be some trees that just naturally can defend themselves against this invasive disease and be part of the future of sassafras going forward. So with that, I hope you learned a little bit about laurel wilt disease. Definitely not something we want to be seeing, but something we're dealing with nonetheless. And so if you're seeing laurel wilt disease and you've got questions about it, please feel free to reach out. Hopefully you don't see it anytime soon, but if you do, we're here to help.
Well, thank you, Ellen. We greatly appreciate that, that presentation. And, it was a lot of great information there for people out there. Be looking for that.
What's happening to our avocados?
I know. That is a big issue as well. And, there's an issue that I like eating avocados, and that it's an important industry there. But it also, if it were to reach Central America, where avocado is a really staple food for a lot of people, I think there are some concerns about what that's going to mean as well.
Yeah, unfortunate, but at least you guys are on it, right?
Yeah,
you're aware of it, and you're looking forward and trying to stop this. But yeah, again, don't move firewood, folks, right? Burn it where you use or
Buy
get it.
where you burn it.
Right. Yeah,
Exactly.
don't be transporting it because you might be moving some other things.
Easily.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You never know what's going to hitchhike with your wood, for sure.
I know, yeah, and unfortunately, we see that happen too frequently, right? Things get spread inadvertently by moving firewood. So don't move firewood, please. Unless you're authorized to know what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you, Ellen.
Yes,
We always appreciate you being on our show.
certainly. Thank you, Dr. Crocker. Thanks for all you do. All right.
Awesome show. Loved it. Learned a lot.
National Water
Yes.
Quality Month. Thank you, Lee Moser, for
Mhm.
kind of highlighting that and talking about the water quality issues and kind of how we quantify that, but also kind of how we can maybe do some things to make it better here in Kentucky.
Mhm.
And then we
Yeah.
talked about Laurel
Laurel
Will
Wills with
disease.
Dr. Ellen Crocker, you know.
Unfortunately, the avocado. Oh, no, that's a little sad. But you know, I think being vigilant on these things is our best chance, right? When we talk about some of the issues that we're dealing with here, managing our woodlands, caring for our woodlands,
Right.
that early detection, right? Those early responses can really save us a lot of time and pain. So being vigilant on what's going on in your woods and being attentive to something new or something out of the ordinary, and please kind of connect with your natural resource professionals because they can help you kind of deal with it sooner, so it doesn't become a bigger problem.
Yeah. And speaking of that, you know, if you go to fromthewoodstoday.com, there's a little survey link that if something happens and you're like, what is this? I don't know what this is in my woods. Send us a photo and we will try to find out what that is. And you never know. It may be hopefully not a future Ellen show on what's bugging my tree, but you just never know.
Yeah.
So we definitely send that to her and she could, we can get that answered for you.
Yeah. Excellent. But again, appreciate you all being with us. Thanks for your interest in learning more about our woodlands and wildlife and natural resources here in Kentucky. Please spread the word, right? We need more champions of those items out there. And the more people who are informed and educated and know who to kind of contact, I think the better off we'll all be. So if you know neighbors or other woodland owners or people who care about woods, let them know about From the Woods Today.
Definitely. So we see you next week. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
From the woods today. From the woods today.